Maria's mother died 2 years ago. She could not cope with the pain of the loss. She missed her mother a lot and cried every day. One day when Maria came to the cemetery, she saw a stranger there. He was standing near her mother's grave, but the girl did not know him. When she approached the grave, the strange man said, "I can bring your mother back." His voice was as dry as sand in the desert. The girl became scared, but she could not leave. She felt a strange sense of numbness. "What do you need to do for this?" Maria asked. She knew that no one would help her just like that. "You are a clever girl," said the stranger. "I will only take what you will not need at all, your eyes." The girl was even more frightened. She had always been afraid of going blind. "Isn't your mum's life worth it?" the man asked. "Okay," said Maria, "but it has to be my mum, and she has to be alive and real. I accept your terms. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt at all," the man said, turned and walked away. The girl looked after him, and it seemed to her that the man had more than 2 legs. The next morning she woke up blind. In the darkness she began to scream, but then her mother appeared and began to calm her down. Maria cried and hugged her. It was her real mom. The girl could no longer see her, but she could hear her and hug her. Even her mom's smell was the same as before. They began to live the same way they had before she died. Dad went to work, and Mom stayed at home, because now she had to take Maria to school and pick her up from there. But the girl was even glad that her mother now spent more time with her, and was not sorry that she had become blind. She learned to live in the dark as the blind live. She couldn't see anything, but she could find everything she needed because she had memorized what was where. And she always helped her mother around the house. There was only one closet the girl was not allowed to touch, but it was always closed, so the girl just pulled the handle and passed by. Once for a holiday, Dad went hunting and shot a deer, which Mom baked in the oven. The smell was very tasty, and the girl really wanted to try the baked meat, but they waited a long time for Daddy to come home from work. When Daddy came, they still hadn't sat down to dinner, and Mom yelled at Daddy for something. Maria didn't understand what was going on, but she wanted it to be over soon, and for them to sit down to dinner. However, Mom and Dad kept fighting. The girl walked from corner to corner, habitually stretching forward her arm to avoid hitting anything. When she passed the closet, which she was not allowed to touch, she pulled the handle as usual. But this time the door suddenly opened. Maria stopped. She suddenly wanted to know what was in the closet. She stretched out her hands and felt something smooth and cold. To the touch, they were large glass jars. There were 3 of them. The girl picked one up and shook it. There was some kind of liquid inside. "Maybe it's compote," she thought. She opened the lid and put her hand inside. The liquid was very cold, like from a refrigerator. The girl's hand caught something small and round. Maria leaned over to the jar and sniffed. The smell was not at all like compote, but it was a familiar smell. It was the way it had smelled in the hospital. She was suddenly afraid, for she realized what lay in those jars and why there were 3 jars. "These are my eyes. And in the other jars are Mommy and Daddy's eyes," thought the girl. She fished the second eye out of the jar and inserted the eyes into her eye sockets. At first, there was only a bright light, but then Maria finally began to see. She saw the room she was in. She saw jars of green liquid. 2 of them actually had eyes floating in them. Then the girl turned her head and saw her mom and dad. Their eye sockets were empty, and instead of legs, there were spider legs, and there were cobwebs everywhere around them. So much cobwebs that Maria even wondered how she hadn't noticed the cobwebs before. Apparently because she only walked in certain places in the house. And when the girl looked at the table, she had to cover her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming. Because on the table in a large dish was not a roasted deer at all. There were human remains lying there. Then Mum and Dad suddenly stopped talking and looked at the girl with empty eye sockets as if they could see her even without eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," Mom said. Her voice had changed, dry as sand. "It's all right," said Daddy. She'll go to sleep now and forget all about it, and tomorrow everything will be as it was before. Marie felt very scared. She realized that the man from the cemetery had deceived her, and she also realized what she had to do now. After all, she really was a smart girl. She ran out into the kitchen, grabbed matches and set fire to the cobwebs that were hanging everywhere. The cobwebs immediately burst into flames, and in a moment the whole house was on fire. The last thing the girl heard were the screams of her mom and dad, or rather spiders that pretended to be her mom and dad. "500 miles to home, 500 miles to family and friends, 500 miles to go. Was the work trip really worth it? I made good money, yes, but why did it have to be me, specifically, going to a conference in San Antonio? I put out my cigarette and walked inside the gas station, grabbed some chips, gum and coffee, walked up to the counter and pulled out my wallet. "Hi, did you find everything you need?" the cashier asked. "Well, yes, at least I have enough to get me through tonight," I replied. She started punching out my purchases, and she said, "Are you from around here?" "No, I am from Iowa." "Went to San Antonio on business," I said. She took the money and handed me a check and said, "A little advice, this town gets a little weird at night. I'd advise you not to drive here until morning." I thanked her for the advice, got out of the gas station, and only now realized how dark it was getting. I looked at my watch. It was 10 to 11. I looked up and saw the man standing literally 50 feet away from me seemed to have vanished into the darkness. I brushed the vision aside, got in my car and drove off. I lit a cigarette and turned on the radio. Suddenly I saw the same guy again, only now he was standing on the side of the road. I turned onto a dirt road that was supposed to lead to the freeway. After 10 minutes of driving, I realized I was lost. I looked at the GPS, but for some reason, it showed that my car was not moving. I realized the GPS was broken, turned around and drove back. But the surrounding landscape still hadn't changed. There was nothing here but the forest and this dirt road. But you can't get lost on a straight road, I thought. And then it appeared. In the rearview mirror, I saw a human figure with long skinny arms, big empty eyes, no mouth. It stayed behind my car at all times, though it didn't move. How it moved was unclear to me. Its gaze made me turn away. The radio was drowned out by some interference, so I turned it off. The entity was still behind me. I hoped to encounter some houses or oncoming cars, but there was nothing but the road and the night darkness. 2 hours passed and I realized I was tired, but was afraid to stop because of this thing behind me. I turned on the radio again, and a scream came out of it. A nervous shiver came over me, and I almost flew into the ditch. I needed some way to regain consciousness. I heard some movement in the back seat, and my blood ran cold. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Then I realized the thing was sitting right behind me. I could feel it reaching into my brain and analyzing my thoughts, trying to kick it out of my head, but no way. That feeling of someone scanning you is etched into my memory for life. My eyes grew heavy, but I tried my best to keep them open. I finished the rest of my coffee and tried to keep my attention as much as I could. I used voice messages to document the situation. Hopefully, I'll be able to find a way out. Either way, I'd like to believe that someone will listen to my messages and post them. It was 6 a.m. on the clock, but nothing was changing around me. I noticed that there was almost no gas left. I looked at the creature again, and I could tell by the look on its face that it was happy. A shiver ran through me. Yeah, I should have listened to the gas station cashier, but did she know what was going to happen to me? And how could she have known? I heard movement in the back seat again. This time I didn't look at it, and I think the creature was angry. Otherwise, how else to explain that my brother suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, and I almost went into a ditch driving around him. My life flashed before my eyes. I thought I would never see my family and friends, my city and everything that is dear to me again. 7 hours of driving in pitch darkness. Hopelessness gripped me. I was scared, but what could I do? Suddenly the car began to slow down and then stopped. I realized that I was now completely at the mercy of this creature, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was daytime. I was sitting in my car at the same gas station as if I'd never left. Only the tank was almost empty for some reason, and a few hundred miles of mileage had been added. I filled up again and drove home. I had 500 miles to go before dark. One chilly fall evening, Alex decided to spend a weekend in nature. He packed his tent, sleeping bag, some food, and went to the forest, located not far from his town. Alex had always loved spending time outdoors, but this time turned out to be completely different. As Alex set up his tent and built a fire, he felt the forest fill with mysterious sounds. Leaves rustled and branches creaked quietly. At first it didn't frighten him, but soon he noticed that the silence of the forest was too oppressive. Night quickly enveloped the forest, and Alex, tired from the road, climbed into the tent. Waking up in the middle of the night, Alex heard strange rustles outside. He thought it was just wild animals, but soon the sounds began to resemble footsteps. His heart beat faster. He opened the tent's zipper and looked outside, but saw nothing. The forest seemed dead, and only the moonlight shone through the branches of the trees. The next day, Alex decided to explore the neighborhood to distract himself from his fears. He came across an abandoned hut, overgrown with moss and covered with cobwebs. It was dark and cold inside, but his curiosity took over. He found an old book with records of local legends that spoke of spirits guarding the forest. Alex took the book with him so he would have something to do in the evening, and back in his tent, he noticed that things had been moved. He started to panic, but decided that maybe he just didn't remember where he had put his things. Later that night, he heard footsteps again. This time they were closer, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Alex, unable to bear it any longer, came out of the tent with a flashlight. He illuminated the space around him and saw a dark figure standing between the trees. The figure didn't move, but Alex felt eyes on him. He shouted, but the sound of his voice was lost in the night silence. The figure suddenly disappeared, leaving only the cold wind. The next morning, Alex packed his things and decided to leave the forest. But when he started walking towards the exit, he noticed that the path he had come on had disappeared. He wandered among the trees, and with every step, he became more and more afraid. Suddenly he heard a whisper calling his name. He tried to cover his ears not to hear it, but it was like the whisper was inside his head, and he couldn't get rid of it. Alex was never able to find a way out and stayed in the forest forever, just like those before him. His tent was found a few days later, but there was no trace of Alex himself. Legends of spirits guarding the forest live on, and the shadow he saw has become part of the forest, waiting for the next lost traveler.